B'siyata d'shmai, we're going to start a brand new parak. We're not going to be finishing it because it is rather long, but let's try to see whatever we can do. Yesterday we discussed barichas. Be'ikar the sugi of how many fasts does a person have to fast for doing one small avera, and if you can be paid, if you can redeem that fasting with the inyan of giving tzedakah. And we ended is that lemaisa we don't fast, but if you can, why not? Perik Dalet. V'ulam. I said that Hagdama because lemaisa it's a shtickle continuation over here in Perik Dalet. V'ulam kol anal. Everything we said until now. Hu ligmar hakapara u'meirik hanefesh la'Hashem achad tshuva. That means if a person wants, because after all, we're not discussing tshuva itself. Tshuva is 3 steps that we've spoken about many times. The Rambam gives us 3 steps of tshuva, right? That's what you do tshuva for. And right at the beginning of Parak Aleph, he explained to us that if a person does tshuva, especially with the Naseh, he's immediately getting a kapara. But what happens if he does things that are more common than that? He needs to cleanse himself from the richa, from the distance that he has. Mimela, that's what this is coming in to do. So he's saying, all of this needs to be done after you finish the tshuva, in order to cleanse yourself after doing the tshuva. Like we said in Mefurish in Perik Beis, which means lemaisa, when a person does something wrong, not only do you say I'm sorry, but you go and buy a present, and that present sort of brings the closeness back together again. That used to be a korban, nowadays it's fasting, and nowadays even more so it's tzedakah. Fine. However, Hascholas mitzvahs HaTeshuva. The ikara, meaning the beginning, the first stage of the mitzvah of doing tshuva, and the ikar, the main part, is loshuv ad Hashem be'emes v'lev shalem. You've got to do tshuva. There's no shortcuts. There's no other way of doing this. You have to admit what you've done wrong. That's the vidoy. You have to have charata. You have to regret the things that you've done. And of course you have to make a Kabbalah, Mekan and Haba, never to do it again. And Belev Shalom, Be'emes is what the Tanya is telling us. That's the Schola, that's real Tshuva. We're going to have to explain this much more. Because yes, we've explained how to cleanse yourself and get closer after you've done the Tshuva, but the Ikka Tshuva has to be done as also. So let's explain. Bahaktim, like this. And it's going on the name Hashem. It gets a little bit complicated. Then one of the names of Hashem is there are different names of Hashem, and each name of Hashem means something else, right? And not obviously it means the Rabbeinu Shalom and it's Echad, obviously. But what I'm saying is there are a lot of underlying Kabbalistic meanings to it, right? One of them, for example, is Din, and one is Rachamim, all sorts of things. So here we're referring to Yud, K, Vav, K, right? That's what we're discussing. Bahagdim Mashikosa b'Zohar Kodesh. She's now going to quote a Zohar Kodesh. We're learning Kabbalah. Bever milas tshuva. How do you explain the word tshuva? Al derech hasoid toshuv Hashem. That's what tshuva means. The Zohar says that the word tshuva is really defined as the words tshuva toshuv Hashem, returning the letter hey. So you've got the yud, hey, vav, hey, and there we're talking over here specifically about the second hey. The one at the end. To return that hey is what we're dealing with, okay? Hey tata, tshuva tata. Hey ilah is tshuva ilah. That means the lower hey, lower level of tshuva is, that's the first hey. And then a hey ilah is the tshuva ilah, the high level. The gamma shegosa b'Zohar Kodesh b'Ksas Mekomis. And even that it says in the Zohar Kodesh from a few places. She'ein tshuva me'eles the poigem b'Yisrael moitzi zera levatola. We've mentioned this, by the way, a few times in the last 2 Parakim. Out of all the Averas that he could have chosen as an example to talk about Averas and doing Tshuva for, he seems to pick again and again and again this Avera of being Poigim, the bris, which means Moitzi Zera Levatola, and he quotes the Zohar that says you cannot do Tshuva for that. It's over, finished, too late. Tanya, doesn't make any sense. There is nothing that stands you in front of, that prevents a person in front of doing tshuva. Even the Gimel Averos Chamuros, which a person has to give his life for, even those Lamaisa a person could do tshuva for. So for sure a person could do tshuva for Zera Levatola. In Shara Kedosha. What does the Zohar means when he says you cannot do tshuva for Zera Levatola? She'ema eles tshuva tata. It doesn't help the lower level, which again This is something that's going to be explained later on. It's specifically in Perek Tes. He's going to explain this more, which I hope Be'ez Hashem will get to next week, hopefully Perek Tes. So hopefully we'll understand a little bit of what we just said over there. But Avada and Avada, there's no such thing as an Avera that you cannot do tshuva for. Every single Avera you can always return to Hashem, you can always do tshuva for. Hine. Let's try to understand a bit more about basic ideas of tshuva. How does it work? We have to give a little bit of an introduction. Inyan HaKoris or Misas based in Kisha'ova Averi Shachayav Malay Koris Hoyames Mamash Kuna Chamishim Shana. That means in earlier days, when a person did an Avera that's Chayiv either Koris or Misa, he would have been killed. He would have died. Over Misas B'dei Shemai Meis Mamash Kuna Mishishim Shana. In other words, if Chas V'Shalom a person's Chayiv Koris, he would have died before his 50th year. He would have died very early. And if a person does an Avera that's Chayiv Misas B'nei Shemayim, he would have died early, before the age of 60. Kechananya ben Azor, Novi b'Yirmiyah, as it says over there. So even Misas B'nei Shemayim has a physical effect in this world. Or sometimes, by the way, if a person does an Avera that's Chayiv Misas B'nei Shemayim, he will be punished immediately. Which we're not going at this moment in time. But the problem is, doesn't make any sense. If you're telling me that a person that's Chayiv Misa or Koris, he gets that punishment in this world by dying early, why is it that we find people who do plenty of Averas and they seem to be living long lives, happy, fulfilled, having a great time? So it doesn't make sense, right? We have to explain it by being a pasuk. Ki chelik Hashem Amma. It's a pasuk in Devarim Lamed Beis. Chelik mishem Havaya. Hashem's name. Baruch Hu. K'desiv vayipach ba'apov nishmas mochaim. We had this in the beginning of the first part of Tanya when he talks to the Sefer Beinanim. The Sefer Shabeinanim is how the Rabban Shem created us by putting his breath, so to speak, into us, by blowing our neshama into our nostrils to allow us to live with our neshama. So when you blow into a balloon, where's it coming from? It's coming from your insides. It's not coming from the atmosphere, it's not coming from outside, it's coming from your insides. Even though, of course, the Rabban doesn't have a physical feature, doesn't have a physical body. So when we say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is blowing from the inside, we can only understand it in our limited understanding of a physical body, which is when we blow a balloon, the air comes from the inside of our body. Chas v'shalom, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have physical features. However, the Torah likes to speak in the Lashon B'nei Adam, the way people speak, just so we can understand it. Otherwise, you would have no idea what's going on. Just like there's a difference between different ways of air that leaves different places of the body. When a person speaks, there's air coming out from his mouth when he speaks. In that air that comes out when he speaks is dressed. And that breath of the air that comes out when he speaks is dressed with a little bit of the chitzonius from the nefesh hachaya, the nefesh habamis that's inside him. Aval. But whereas when you blow, for example, into a balloon, that's much more powerful than speaking. Right? There's a lot more air that comes out of your mouth when you blow into a balloon than when you speak in that case, right? That means when you blow, it's coming from mamish the inside. When I'm speaking, maybe it only comes from my throat area, my neck area, whatever it is. Okay? So there's a difference between how what you're doing to how the air comes out and what it contains within it. Kacha mamish. It's the same thing. Al derech moshel hamavdol avdolas le'ein kates. Right? And even though it's impossible to compare a human being to the Rebbeinu Shalom, because it doesn't exist, you simply can't do it, we are in some way going to try. Yesh hefesh otzum ma'oid lamala bein kol tzova shamayim v'afilu hamalachim. There's a huge nafkamina. We're explaining now the difference between HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking and HaKadosh Baruch Hu blowing. Because we said HaKadosh Baruch Hu blew the neshama inside every single one of us. So therefore, what we're saying is, there's a massive difference between being kol tzova shamayim v'afilu hamalachim shenevu ma'in yesh. Right? Even the malachim were created from nothing. V'choyim v'kayomim, and how do they live? Where's the energy of the malachim? Mebechinas hachitzonius hachius v'hashafa shemashpia ein soy baruch hu yachas olamos, is because the Rebbeinu Shalom gives tremendous shefa without any end to these creatures. Again, it's only a marshal to say that the Rebbeinu Shalom blew with his mouth. He doesn't have a mouth, doesn't have breath. Which is also the same idea when the Kodesh Baruch Hu made the world with 10 mamoros, 10 sayings. That's how the world was created. I told you it gets a little bit technical, this one. Obey nishmas odom, and between an neshama of a human being, in that case. So our connection to the Rebbeinu Shalom is much deeper because HaKadosh Baruch Hu blew from himself, Kaviyachol, into us. So we have that piece of Hashem, that chelik elokam ma'al mamish that we said over there at the beginning of Parak Aleph in Sefer Shabbanim, that every single yid has a chelik elokam ma'al mamish, and we have a deep connection. So the question is, why don't we feel it? If we have that amazing connection to Hashem, why don't we feel it? If we've got a piece of Hashem and find it inside of us, why are we not feeling it? And this will end. And this is something that we've spoken about previously, which means that in order for the Rebbeinu Shalom to create something and make it in a physical way so that we can see it, react to it, interact with it, it has to go and be diluted many, many times until it can reach this physical world. I mean, even the table that's in front of us is Be'etzem, the Machshava of Hashem. The reason that we can see it and feel it is because it got diluted. It went down into all the throughout the world to be able to come into a physical form. So that's the reason why we don't feel it, but ultimately, really it's there. That connection that HaKadosh Baruch Hu blew into us, our neshama, is inside. We should be able to feel it. However, because of the Seisa Madrega, as he calls it over here, that goes down into all of the levels, in order to sort of have the guf, the physical, cover it, therefore it changes. It got a little bit technical, a little bit of a hard parak, but in Mitzvah Shem, tomorrow, B'siyata D'Shmaya, we should try to finish it, and hopefully we'll have some clarity over there.